All right. Welcome back, everybody, to another one of our Insights at Work sessions. And today, well, right now, joined by Joe Sauer from Sentient. Joe, how are you?
I'm terrific. Thanks, Lenny.
It's great. Glad to have you. Always, Sentient just always does fantastic presentations. And I think this will be no exception to that rule. So with that, I'll go away and let you dive in and show how true that really is.
Sure. Thanks very much. Welcome, everybody. What we'd like to talk about today is our efforts to help fix retail's weakest link, which is essentially the payment element of the retail shopping experience. But before we talk about that, I'd like to start our talk with a brief stroll down memory lane, as it were, and talk for just a few moments about the interaction between memory and emotion. We know that emotion has a disproportionate influence over the brands that we buy, where we buy them, the price that we pay for them, and in a social media active world, the extent to which we evangelize about them. And so this connection between memory and emotion is really crucial for retailers of all stripe. Now, it might surprise you how biased we are in how we form memories from our experiences. Even when we think we're remembering specific facts about an experience, our recollection of events is typically incomplete and really heavily dependent on the feelings that we were having during the experience. Put differently, our memories of positive and negative experiences are dependent on two things: what we were feeling at the most extreme or peak point of the experience, and how the experience ended, that final endpoint. Our memories are really typically not an average of what we felt across the full experience, and really are not reflective of the amount of time we were engaged in the experience. This psychological heuristic, I won't call it a rule, because I don't think there's enough scientific validation yet to call it a rule, but let's call it a heuristic, was first described by the godfather of behavioral science, Daniel Kahneman. And it explains why we can actually be irrational in our recollection and our memory of events. It also just suggests that our memories consist of a series of highlights rather than a thorough and incontrovertible record of facts and events. And what we know from the study of memory is that the more profound a memory is, either positively or negatively, the more likely or the more deeply it will be embedded in long-term memory, as opposed to simply being resident in short-term memory, which, as we know, is really flushed as soon as we move on to a new sensory experience. So if we apply the peak end rule to the shopping process, it becomes clear that we really haven't paid enough attention to this end point or final step of the process. We've spent a lot of time focusing on the peak or the duration of the shopping experience, but not enough time focused on that endpoint or final step, the experience of actually paying for things that we've shopped for. This is really important because what we remember about our shopping experience will affect our perceptions and the favorability of both the retailer at which we shopped and the brands that we've purchased in a multi-brand type of retail experience. Having said that, this applies equally to any app that sells directly to consumers, even from big brands. This applies to quick service restaurants. This applies to anyone that actually takes money from a consumer's bank account or from their credit card. This is a fundamental component of the experience and really needs to be examined more profoundly. Now, if you're engaged in the business of traditional bricks and mortar retail, you know that we've invested millions. We continue to invest millions of dollars in the architecture and design of our bricks and mortar stores. We use techniques like planograms, shelf findability experiments, end cap optimization, ad infinitum, but these all tend to exclude the register experience, not the queuing experience per se, but the actual experience in front of a register where I'm wielding my credit card or my payment card to actually pay for the goods that I've bought. And interestingly enough, these insights also apply in a registerless checkout experience like Amazon is experimenting with now in the UK and select other locations around the globe. Likewise, in the world of mobile commerce or m-commerce, we tend to obsess about UX and UI. We use wireframes and human factors design principles to optimize people's experiences through the mobile app. But then we typically rely on a payment plugin or an API to a payment processor to actually process the customer's payment. And as a result, that element really doesn't form part of all of the wonderful research and thinking that we've done and optimization work that we've completed and implemented. Unfortunately, we're doing exactly the same thing in the emerging world of voice commerce, focusing, for example, on the type of voice our VUI assistants, our voice user interface or voice assistants should have, how consumers will engage in discovery through the design of our voice interface when they don't have a physical, tangible display in front of them. But we're largely ignoring the final culminating step of that process, which is the payment experience. And so what we did is set out to essentially measure consumer response to the payment experiences in each of these three channels: in-store, which is typically done through some sort of a card scanner or card reader; mobile, which is typically done, as I mentioned before, through some sort of API-based or applet plugin to a payment processor; and
Jurassic Park.
Also in
Purchasing Jurassic Park.
With voice-based payment experiences or voice assistant-based experiences. We used a research approach called implicit association testing to measure consumers' emotional responses to the payment experiences as they're currently built and delivered. Card readers for in-store experiences, applet or plugin based processing through mobile experiences, and then obviously the mobile or the voice-based confirmation in a VUI experience. With implicit association testing, emotional responses are essentially plotted on a scale where 100 is the neutral point, representing emotional neutrality. Scores over 100 represent emotionally positive reactions, and scores under 100 represent emotionally negative or distressing reactions. As you can see, the typical in-store payment experience triggers a negative emotional response among consumers at a 95.3, below that 100 or neutral line. The negative emotions that really dominate the payment element of our shopping experience range from anxiety. Is this a good price? Am I overpaying for what I'm buying? Will I be charged more than once for this transaction? Will my credit card details be skimmed and cloned? And will I be the subject of payment fraud or identity theft? So anxiety to guilt. Can I afford this? What else could I buy with this money? Should I actually be saving instead of spending? And at times, even manifesting as extreme negative emotions like shame, fear, anger, and so on. At a 95.3, this reaction actually falls into the 5th percentile of all emotional responses ever tested in our database, going back about 12 or 13 years. Just to anchor a 95.3 in the context of more familiar and perhaps relatable experiences, the strongest negative experience that we've ever tested is experiencing someone screaming in pain. That actually triggers an implicit response of 83.5. And the strongest positive experience we've ever tested is actually the experience of a baby laughing, which generates an implicit result of 116.8. So you can see, put in that type of context, not only does a payment experience, the typical payment experience in store, generate a negative emotional reaction, it's closer to experiencing someone screaming in pain than experience a baby laughing. Put shortly or bluntly, if we look at the peak end rule, we are actually ending the shopping experience on a grossly negative emotional level, which, as we know, will tend to color through classical conditioning our perceptions and favorability of the retailer we've just shopped at, as well as the brands that I've bought during my shopping. Now, when I turn to both mobile payment experiences as well as voice-based payment experiences, you can see that they don't quite have the same level of anxiety or guilt or shame or fear or anger as in-store payment experiences. But the emotional response to those experiences is so mildly positive at just over that 100 line, 101.8, 101.5. They're so mildly positive as to essentially be emotionally neutral. And remember, according to the peak end rule, emotional neutrality is not what we're hoping to deliver as the end step of the shopping process. So as good researchers, we formed the hypothesis and tested whether we could alleviate some of the negative emotion that dominates that payment experience, particularly for this in-store channel, by integrating trusted brand logos into the experience. Could that trusted brand logo actually mitigate some of the anxiety about card skimming, about overpaying, about affordability, and so on? And so for the in-store experience, we actually tested 3 different types of logos. We tested the integration of credit card logos or card processor logos, in this case, MasterCard, which we'll use as the proxy, if you will, for all of the credit card brands that we tested, including MasterCard, Visa, Discover, and so on. We also tested a variety of eCash platforms like Apple Pay, Google Pay, and Venmo. And we also tested retail brands for an assortment of big retailers, from mass merchandisers like Walmart and Target and Costco through to quick service restaurants like McDonald's and Pizza Hut and so on. We also tested their mobile equivalents. So integrating the MasterCard logo, for example, into the mobile payment experience, integrating the Apple Pay logo, and integrating some sort of retailer logo into the results or into the experience. Obviously, without visual displays, the vast majority of smart speakers, for example, are voice only. They don't actually have a visual display. It's impossible to integrate a visual display into an audio only device. So at least for this step of the research, we skipped over the voice commerce element in our testing. So for presentation purposes, we're going to show you the change in emotional appeal from the generic or unbranded payment experience to this branded payment experience using visual logos. And we're going to show you the results for MasterCard as a proxy for all the credit cards, Apple Pay as a proxy for all the eCash platforms, and then the average of all the specific retail brands that we tested. We didn't want to show any specific retail brand as a proxy because results do vary significantly from one retailer to the next. And we didn't want to call out any specific retailer because they're not necessarily in the payment experience game at this point in the same way that MasterCard and Apple Pay would be, for example. But when we start to look at the results, you can see that across the in-store channel, adding the visual logo for credit card brands like MasterCard on the one hand, or specific retailer brands on the other hand, actually does a good job at offsetting all of that negative emotion as part of the payment experience. We go from a 95.3, well below the line, to a 102.7 and a 103.6 respectively, above the line. Having said that, we don't really drive into positive territory. We're simply offsetting the negative. So again, the peak end rule would have us really focus on transforming this into a very fundamentally positive experience. This is doing a good job at mitigating some of the negative experience, but not really driving us yet into that positive territory. More problematic is these eCash platforms, using Apple Pay as the example. Their visual logos actually don't do anything to offset the negative experience of the payment process. They alleviate a bit of the negative, but certainly don't, on a net basis, push it into positive territory. We're still left with a negative emotional response to the in-store payment experience. When we turn and look at the mobile channel, we can see that we get similar results. MasterCard's logo actually pushes a marginally positive, essentially neutral response into positive territory. In fact, a little bit more positive even in the mobile channel than the in-store channel. And similarly with the retail brands, integrating the visual logo of the retailer I'm shopping at actually pushes us from essentially neutral into increasingly positive territory. Again, we have a real problem with some of the eCash platforms, using Apple Pay as the example, where introducing the visual logo for these providers or these platforms actually pushes us back into negative territory. I'm reintroducing, or in fact, reaffirming a lot of the reasons that I was anxious about this transaction in the first place. And so these e-payment or eCash platforms actually reintroduce a whole lot of negativity into the mobile payment experience. And so we clearly have more work to do than just using brand logos, the visual representation of a brand through a logo. Okay. So our next hypothesis was that we could actually integrate sound into the payment experience, and that in combination with a trusted brand represented through the visual identity or visual logo, that logo lockup, a brand logo with a sonic affirmation or a sonic logo of the payment experience could actually push us further into that positive territory. We know from all of our sensory research that well-designed sounds can actually infuse sensory experiences with identity and meaning. And so the hypothesis that sound can contribute something specific to this experience is a well-founded one in the research. In this case, we can test both in-store and mobile as well as voice assistants, because the voice assistants do have the obvious capability of using sound as part of the payment transaction. So you can see that for in-store, we add a MasterCard Sonic logo. MasterCard, as many of you will know, has invested heavily in its sonic identity system or framework, and to much fanfare in 2020, and actually developed a variation of their corporate sonic logo that they felt was appropriate for use in a payment context specifically. And so we tested Visa's the same, American Express is the same. And so we tested the in-store payment experience using the MasterCard logo. Similarly, we tested the in-store experience using the Apple Pay Sonic logo, as well as other eCash providers. And then in collaboration with a sound studio based in New York with a global presence called Man-Made Music, we actually tested the association of each brand, specific brand logo, with a sound that was custom designed, purpose-built to work optimally in the payment context. So not a variation of an existing Sonic logo, but something that was designed specifically for purpose in the payment experience. We also tested the mobile equivalents of each of those experiences, and finally the voice equivalents in each of those experiences.
Buy Jurassic Park.
Purchasing Jurassic Park.
Buy Jurassic Park.
Purchasing Jurassic Park.
Buy Jurassic Park.
Purchasing.
However, when we now look at the results and we compare it to the two results we've seen, both the generic unbranded experience, especially what we're delivering today, a visually branded experience, integrating logos, visual logos, and then this sonic and visual or multi-sensory experience, you can see that in the case of MasterCard, where they simple sonic variation of an existing corporate logo, they've actually fallen pretty short of the mark. They're integrating their payment logo, or payment signature, actually does nothing to improve the emotional appeal of the overall payment experience. Now, it also identified that there are attributes of the payment and reliability and so on that are furthered by the sonic look. So it's doing well on an attribute association level. The overall emotional appeal of the experience itself, it's doing to push that experience into emotionally positive territory. With the Apple Pay logo specifically, it is doing a good job at alleviating all of the negative emotion tied up in the in-store payment experience, and certainly extending into positive territory in a way that the visual logo couldn't do. But if you take a look at that third graphic on the right-hand side, you can see that the sonic element, the sonic logo, that was designed purposefully for the retail experience, the retail payment experience, is actually now pushing well beyond the emotional resonance or emotional appeal that the visual logo on its own was able to generate. And so they're working in tandem very effectively. And at a 105.9, we're now starting to push into the second quartile in our database of all emotional experiences ever tested. When we look at the mobile results, we can see quite similar results for the credit card platforms and the eCash platforms. The addition of Sonic is doing very little to improve the emotional appeal of the overall experience for credit card issuers, using MasterCard as the example. Doing a little bit of hard lifting for the eCash platforms, using Apple Pay as the example, but certainly not pushing into positive territory. But in the case of using trusted retail brands in combination with a purpose-built Sonic logo, you can see that we're now pushing the emotional appeal of the overall payment experience as a key element of the shopping whole process, the entire shopping process, into very positive emotional territory. This is the point at which we want to end that shopping process, that shopping experience, according to the peak end rule. And at a 107.7, you've now pushed into the top quartile of all emotional experiences that we've ever tested. Certainly leaving the consumer with the type of emotional ending point that we would hope to achieve. Now, when it comes to voice, obviously we don't have the visual brand element, so we're only comparing the generic today experience to a sonically branded experience. You can see that in voice commerce, we still have a way to go. We're not actually achieving the same kind of lift, even using the bespoke, purpose-built Sonic logo in that third column. We're not achieving the same kind of lift and pushing into emotionally positive territory. This really suggests that what works for mobile and in-store can't simply be ported across all payment channels, whether it's voice commerce or other emerging channels. And more work is needed, both in terms of development and in terms of research, to actually optimize sound for integration into voice commerce-based payment experiences. So what does all this mean? Essentially, for marketers, sound has clout. Sound is probably the single most under-leveraged element of not only the shopping experience, but the marketing arsenal in terms of marketing communication, from advertising to brand positioning to, in fact, the shopper experience or any kind of communications collateral material. We know that sound impacts us at a subconscious level, and in fact, it impacts us primarily at a subconscious level, acting to really infuse those experiences with both identity and meaning. So if you're going to use sound, knowing that it operates primarily on a subconscious level, you have to use research techniques that operate at a subconscious level. That means in the case of sonic testing with Sentient, using techniques like implicit association testing rather than traditionally consciously formulated questions. How do I think I feel about this sound, or how does this sound make me think I feel? You really need to match the research technique with the primary operant effect of the stimulus that you're testing. And for sound, that is emotional or subconscious effects. Secondly, the context within which sound is used is king. Context is king. And so to optimize the impact of sound, we really need to understand the context within which that sound is delivered. We can't simply test sound in a vacuum using either artificial intelligence or heuristic models. We need to present the sound in situ, in the context in which it's being used. Otherwise, we're actually invalidly estimating, inaccurately estimating the true impact of the sound as part of an experience. And finally, if we've learned nothing else through this COVID period in 2020 and early 2021, the only constant is that there are no constants. The only constant is change. We know from a lot of research on sound through this COVID period that the role sound plays as part of an experience, the impact of sound itself does evolve over time as our personal mood, mindset, and perspectives change, and as cultural norms and cultural outlook changes. Through this COVID period, whether we're dealing with Black Lives Matter or angst about election results in the US, all of these things combine to affect mood, mindset, and perspective. And as a result, the impact and role of sound in experiences through that time frame changes as well, which again places a premium on ongoing continual development and research that goes hand in hand with that continued development. Now for any questions, I'd love to turn this back over to Lenny and see what else we can answer.
Oh, I was muted, wasn't I? There I was, just going on
Sure.
and on. So, and I was saying such, gloriously wonderful things, Joe. Let's see if I can remember it. That was great. This topic, actually, it's bubbled up a few times recently in other conversations around the impact of sound on emotion, and I'm aware there's lots of things happening around this. Was there, just from your perspective, was there something else that you saw or some other research that you were aware of that triggered this for you to explore? What prompted you to go down this path?
Great question. We do a lot of work isolating and quantifying emotional response as part of a larger experience. We know that our perspectives, our perceptions, our attitudes, and really our behavior as consumers, as human beings, is incredibly framed, shaped, influenced by what's happening on a subconscious level. And so our whole modus operandi, the entire reason that Sentient came into being, was our dissatisfaction with our ability, using state-of-the-art techniques, to actually model and predict human behavior in an accurate way. And what we really discovered was that was because most of these state-of-the-art techniques, even those with very powerful experimental designs underlying them, were missing the emotional component. We were using conscious techniques to research subconscious thought processes. And so this specific aspect of the shopping process actually came out of a larger piece of research, client research, that we were doing around UX UI design for shopping experiences, both app-based mobile shopping experience as well as traditional in-store shopping experiences. And what we stumbled over almost by accident, as all, the seed of all great scientific discoveries tend to come from happy accidents, we just stumbled over this fact, if you will, this data point that showed that emotional response throughout the shopping process actually declined the more proximate, the closer you got to the register, whether that was a virtual register in the case of a mobile transaction or a physical register in the case of a traditional brick and mortar transaction. And the more we explored, the more we realized it was anticipation of going to happen in that moment where somebody actually took money from you. And as we know, there may be no more stressful experiences, or at least few experiences that are more stressful than actually taking money away from someone. And so when we really explored it in more detail, we found something very fundamental. And it was really understanding or mapping the emotions that occur at that moment in time. And that gave rise to this idea that we must be able to do something in a multi-sensory world. We must be able to do something to offset all of that negative emotion. And so this was really an opportunity for visual identity designers to combine with sonic experience designers to try to map some experience that was not just offsetting what is negative or distressful about these payment experience, but actually create something positive out of it, not just neutral, but actually pushing into positive territory. And so although we stumbled onto the problem, we actually innovated using hypothesis and real scientific method, iterated towards finding an optimal solution. And we feel like for any type of brand that deals with consumers, that actually takes money from consumers, they really need to pay attention to this, because it will color everything that consumers feel about their brand and really affect the preference for that brand, whether they're a retailer, whether they're a mobile app developer, whether they're a v-commerce platform or whatnot.
So we can sum that up, that poor sonic design is if we hear doom, 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 or ow, right? That would be our experience. But if we hear baby laughing, then, although I would have to say it'll feel very disingenuous if I start hearing a baby laugh and anytime that I make a payment. It's like, no, come on. So.
Yeah, we don't want people to be laughing when they see our bank balance. That's for sure.
Well, I don't know. I looked at mine this morning.
But you raise an interesting point, and that is there are sounds that are simply situationally inappropriate. We just by routine, we test sonic logos, corporate brand logos continuously. And one of the best performing brand logos historically has been the McDonald's logo, the Justin Timberlake inspired I'm loving it logo. And what we found as we tested that through the COVID era, starting essentially last March and then testing it every couple of months until as recently as a few weeks ago, is that that was too jaunty and too happy. It was actually so situationally inappropriate for this COVID era, when I couldn't get my McDonald's necessarily, that it was actually eroding McDonald's brand equity. And McDonald's realized this. They were pretty savvy, and they actually rolled out a temporary sonic variation of that logo, which was more of a spoken word type of logo by an actor named Brian Cox, who has kind of a very distinctive, almost crusty old man type of sound. And you can find it online or email me for examples, but it was essentially really a mouthed and much more kind of low-key, laid back, a little bit more relaxed. And that tested off the charts through the COVID era. And so McDonald's knew quite perceptively that they couldn't use a logo, a sound that was simply, had extremely successful up until COVID hit, but that was situationally inappropriate, like laughing at your bank balance. And so they made this slight tweak that didn't lose the brand recognition. It had the same sonic structure, but the instrumentation was more situationally appropriate. And so we see this time and time again. If you are going to use sound, you need to continue to ensure that it is optimized for the context within which it's going to be consumed, if you will. And yes, I would say that laughing when one sees one's bank balance is probably an emotionally negative thing as opposed to an emotionally positive thing.
So there's all types of stuff going through my head, and I'll be conscious of time. I do have one more question that I think is interesting. Sure. I've been reading quite a bit lately about sound frequencies. 432 hertz is kind of this optimal elicits biological responses, right? And I think everybody knows I have neurological crap, and so I've been trying to see, well, maybe that'll help. And
Are you announcing to the world that you're actually insane?
Well, no, I mean, maybe. I mean, everybody kind of knows that, but but no, I have this mitochondrial disease, and it manifests in weird, neuromuscular crap. Anyway, point is that I stumbled on this and was the studies show that this frequency of 432 hertz, not necessarily the sound itself, but the frequency has an impact on us emotionally as well. So you're nodding. Have you guys tested that in combination with these sounds as well about the frequency itself?
Definitely. You're absolutely right in the case of frequency, but there are, from a thematic sonic composition perspective, there are dozens of factors, of attributes about sound and music that not just frequency that have the same type of impact. So timbre, pitch, tone, changes in variation in pacing, all of these factors go into the effectiveness or lack of effectiveness of a particular composition. So when we're engineering or manufacturing sound for experience integration into consumer experiences, that's something that you really do need expertise in sound strategy, sound composition, music composition. And that's why, as experts in neurological research, we actually partner with Man-Made Music, soon to be Made Music Studios, in actually doing that compositional dimension of the work. They are experts in sound strategy, sonic experience creation, and music composition. And then we end up, testing what they develop on that basis. But you're absolutely right. There are all sorts of elements of the sound, properties of the sound, composed sound, that go into understanding our emotional response. Where this is actually coming into play most clearly is in voice assistants. And we know that the context within which that voice assistant is being used can be really crucial. So just simple questions like, do I use a male voice or a female voice? What sort of accent do I use? What sort of pitch, interval, timbre should that voice have? There are some guidelines around the development of those voices, but the key really is develop, test, revise, develop, test, revise, develop, test, revise, and make sure that you're testing and using test approaches that are appropriate for what you're trying to measure, which is the subconscious impact that those subtle differences have.
Sure. Now, so we could go on and on about this. There's tons of stuff going through my head.
We could.
I mean, like by using ways of do we use Samuel L. Jackson or do we use Pierce Brosnan? Right. Totally different experience in how you react to that. So
absolutely.
Anyway. As always, fascinating stuff, Joe. Thank you so much. I'm sure that there's questions in the Q&A in the chat box. We'll let you get to that, and we will move on to our next session. But thank you, as always, for you're making us think. So
wonderful.
That's great. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, honey. All right. Bye-bye.